What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Thursday Night Football FanDuel NFL Q&A, talking about a pretty good game that could have been even better with the Arizona Cardinals hosting the Green Bay Packers. As you can see here on FanDuel Sportsbook, still got a 51-point over-under despite tons of injuries and players on the COVID-19 list. Davonte Adams, Alan Lazard, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, all presumably out for the Packers. Valdez-Scantling unlikely to be activated for tonight. J.J. Watt also out potentially for the season with the shoulder injury. So we've got a lot of news to go over. Of course, the skill position players for the Packers are going to be the bigger talking point for today's show. So welcome on in to the FanDuel NFL Q&A for this week. I'm your host, Brandon Gdula. I'm the managing editor at numberfire.com. You can find all of my content over there. I do a bunch of simulation-based stuff. I do a lot of sort of weekly prep articles that help you with things like matchups, pace, ranking every game in terms of the fastest paced games, the games with the highest adjusted pass rates, things like that. The types of things you want to figure out for your daily fantasy lineups, but I'll go over that and what we need to know for tonight's slate. But if you have questions for the weekend, you can find all that there. And you can also find, and I think this will be very helpful because I get a lot of start-sit questions on this Thursday night Q&A. You can find my start-sit column. And what I do there for a start-sit column, it's a little untraditional. I go through and I simulate out this slate 1,000 times. And I show the odds that for quarterbacks and tight ends that they finish as top 12 players. And for running backs and receivers, it's top 24 at their position. Kind of helps you get an idea of the range of outcomes, the expectations for players. It's a little bit like a rankings list, but shows a little bit more than just flat rankings. So I would recommend that. Of course, if you do have start-sit questions, you can ask those here, but I will be trying to focus primarily on the Thursday night game, in particular, how it pertains to the FanDuel single game slate. So get those questions in on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Twitch if you have questions for tonight's game or, again, the weekend. But I'm going to start, as I always do, by breaking down the game for tonight, so I at least get that out of the way. And then I dig into the questions. So I'm going to jump over to my spreadsheets here and look, as I always like to do first, at matchups and pace and pass rate. These numbers here for the pass defense show NumberFire's passing net expected points per dropback allowed to opposing quarterbacks this season, as well as passing success rate allowed. The Cardinals clearly, as you can see here, good pass defense overall. They're second in passing net expected points per dropback allowed to opposing passers, and they also hold opposing passers to a top 8 success rate allowed. So the success rate basically shows consistency, consistent gains, the expected points, looking at more at big plays, limiting big plays, generating sacks, things like that. Again, with the J.J. Watt injury, we could expect this to regress a little bit, but still overall a very good pass defense. But the same can kind of be said for the Packers to a lesser degree. 16th, so about league average in passing success rate allowed, but still top 10 in passing net expected points per dropback allowed to opposing passers. As far as the rushing matchups go, neither team is particularly stout overall from a rushing success rate allowed standpoint. Both teams sitting outside the top 20, so we could look at some consistent gains. And I think that's relevant because the Packers, despite being really pass heavy last week, they seems like they want to throw the ball. They're without a lot of key pass catchers, so their game plan might be to run the ball tonight and slow things down because they are the slowest adjusted offense in the league. If you look at their passes and rushes, when their pre-snap win probability is between 20 and 80%, so basically excluding garbage time, excluding blowouts, they run the slowest offense in football. You would anticipate that they try to run the ball plenty. They might be able to do it with that 1-2 punch of Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. So if you're looking for a way to say this game stays under, there's not as much offensive production as a 51-point over-under implies, it's probably because Green Bay is able to run the ball and they try to milk the clock play some keep away from Kyler Murray and this Cardinals offense. As far as the passing goes, though, in terms of the skill position players and their individual matchups, it's going to be tough for the Packers based on how the Cardinals have rated out overall in terms of player level adjusted FanDuel points per target. So this looks at, what's the difference between a target from Davonte Adams and Allen Lazard. Of course, those guys are out for tonight, but I like to look at that player level stuff rather than team level stuff, just because it's something that I don't see a lot elsewhere. And as the sample grows throughout the season, I do like this number. And the Cardinals have been really good, top 10 across the board, across all three positions. I will say that this is not going to be enough to avoid Aaron Jones, to avoid Robert Tonyan, just because they rate out well here. It's just more that maybe we should keep expectations a little bit more in check and be more in on Tonyan, for example, whenever we think that the Packers do kind of play some keep away. Maybe Tonyan scores 1 or 2 touchdowns and the Packers don't put up a ton of points, but neither do the Cardinals. That's kind of situation that you're trying to look for whenever a team is really good against tight ends or running backs out of the backfield. As for the Packers, not quite as strong against receivers and just about league average against the tight end position and the running backs out of the backfield. And I'll get to some questions in a second, but again, keep those coming on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Twitch. But I want to go over the historical optimal lineup trends just to get an overview for what we're kind of looking at for similar games, comparable games since 2019 on FanDuel. So if you look at a 65-game sample since the start of 2019, where totals have been at least 48.5, spreads between 4.5 and 8.5, we see that overall, this is the total sample right here, these numbers here. So we see quarterbacks a little bit more likely to finish as the MVP, the top scorer on a slate in games like this. Makes sense. Plenty of points to go around, chances for multiple touchdowns. It's kind of what you need as a passer. Both these quarterbacks do have some rushing potential for tonight. So that's very telling. And that means that we should probably primarily anticipate that Rodgers and Kyler Murray are the best MVP choices from a process standpoint. We do see, however, running backs go down a little bit. Looks like I have these inversed, but you get the point. And running backs go down a bit from 28%. So they're actually down. Just a spreadsheet error right there. Go down about 6 percentage points. Wide receivers stay about the same. Tight ends never really a good MVP bet to begin with. You could maybe make the case for Tonyan tonight, just because he might have a majority of the touchdown equity for this team without Davonte Adams and his elite red zone share. So you can make the case for Robert Tonyan. If you're willing to play Robert Tonyan at MVP, you don't have to do a whole lot else to differentiate. I'm probably not going to get that crazy, but as far as like Zach Ertz goes, the target share probably not strong enough for him to lead this slate in FanDuel points. As for favorites versus underdog splits go, favorites in these comparable games accounted for about 65% of the optimal MVPs. And then overall, your most likely player, if you take a step back, kind of remove the names from these players and you say, who process-wise is most likely to finish as the MVP? It's Kyler Murray, because he's the favorite quarterback. And favorite quarterbacks in these comparable games finishes the MVP about 35% of the time, followed by underdog quarterbacks about half the time compared to the favorite quarterbacks. But this isn't really groundbreaking. Quarterbacks always typically the best bet for MVP odds. Wide receiver favorites, though, I would say pretty intriguing here. From this standpoint, it would most likely just be DeAndre Hopkins we'd be considering at MVP. As far as kickers go, I think I see a kicker question in here already. Not the right type of game environment relative to a full split for kickers to make the optimal MVPs. Still about a third of the chance, 29%, 30% for kickers to make an MVP in these sort of high scoring game scripts. So you don't have to write off the kickers, but not necessarily as good a play as we have in lower scoring games with fewer touchdowns. And then, of course, whenever an MVP does come from the underdog side, it's more often than not that it's the quarterback, but a running back underdog still very much in play. So I think that should leave us on Aaron Jones plenty, despite the game script. All right, I'm going to dig into these questions now that I've broken down kind of the top level view of what I'm looking for tonight's slate. So again, if you have any questions, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, or Twitch. Question from Grimfan: Rodgers MVP, Murray, Cobb, Jones, Ertz. I would say that's probably a very good baseline lineup. I would say that that's probably a very chalky lineup. That's the kind of lineup where, yes, you have Rodgers at MVP instead of Kyler. That alone is still a good lineup. That's probably going to be duplicated a lot. So it comes down to your tolerance level of whether you're okay having the same lineup. And if that lineup goes off, your top prize might be split up a bunch. So this is kind of what single game DFS comes down to is, do you want to build the most obvious sort of optimal lineup, or do you want to try to factor in ranges of outcomes and variance? So again, great lineup, nothing wrong with that, but I think it'll be a very popular lineup overall. Another question from Grim Fan: thoughts on Mercedes Lewis? So I'll jump over to my simulation results for this game specifically, and we can see that where are you at, Mercedes? Down here, projected for 3.3 median FanDuel points. Not the worst value overall. Not someone that you would consider for MVP. Obviously, if you're going tight end at MVP, you could do better with Robert Tonyan, even Zach Ertz. But again, just very unlikely that tight ends, even someone like Travis Kelce, he doesn't really finish as the MVP very frequently. But his flex odds still kind of low in terms of top 5 scoring potential. The way that Mercedes Lewis makes this is probably with an Aaron Rodgers MVP stack, because that would give Rodgers an extra touchdown or possibly 2. We haven't seen Mercedes Lewis with a great red zone role over the past 3 games. At least he doesn't have a red zone target, but they're so depleted. And Mercedes Lewis profiles as someone who definitely can score in the red zone because he's just so big and athletic. So at 6,000, I think that Mercedes Lewis is a fantastic pivot play, the type of play who, again, probably not a better process-based play, a better floor play than someone like Equanimeous St. Brown, who rates out with basically double the projected sort of median FanDuel point outcome. But that's just more of a volume-based play. Mercedes Lewis definitely has touchdown upside, and I think that he's actually a pretty good play for to score a touchdown. He's listed at plus 850 on FanDuel Sportsbook. It's about 10.5% likely there. Number Fire does project him for about 0.12 touchdowns, so you can kind of say 12% chance he scores there. I like Mercedes Lewis as a long shot touchdown bet, and if he scores, that's going to be enough for him, most likely to make the optimal lineup, unless this game is an absolute shootout, which it could be still. But one thing with the Cardinals that kind of keeps me, it just keeps me worried on like main slates is their target shares are very dispersed. And so we're looking at something like a Rondale Moore game where he gets 4 targets, but has a long catch, like long touchdown to really separate him. So it's really DeAndre Hopkins has been separating, which kind of sounds weird, but his target share has been relatively down to start the year. It's trending up. Zach Ertz was very involved for being an incoming tight end last week, but the market shares overall for the Cardinals kind of make it a little bit less likely that multiple guys really pop off. So someone like a Mercedes Lewis could get there at 6,000, really get you access to both quarterbacks in your lineup. Question from John: I need to play one wide receiver in a flex out of Chris Godwin, Calvin Ridley, Kyle Pitts, and Joe Mixon. Who am I playing? Very good situation to have. I would probably say one receiver, one flex. Boy. So I'm really big on the Falcons this week. I talked on the Heat Check Daily Fantasy podcast this morning, previewing the main slate, about how Matt Ryan's actually been a lot better the past 3 games than he was to start the season. And you can pinpoint the fact that his air yards numbers have gone way up the past 3 games. His ADOT is up from I think 4.2, 4.4, somewhere in that range, the first three, which is crazy low, to 9.1 over the past 3 games. So the I like the Falcons offense. I still think I'd have to go with Chris Godwin there and probably Calvin Ridley. Joe Mixon was a little bit limited. They're playing the Jets. They probably don't need to give Joe Mixon a full workload. It's honestly a really good situation to be in, but I would lean Chris Godwin and Calvin Ridley there, unless you really think that Joe Mixon is set for his full workload, which just probably doesn't have to happen against the Jets. Question from Andrew: is Cobb the favorite target of Rodgers tonight with all the receivers out? Also, Connor or Edmonds? So I will start with the Cobb question. I would anticipate that Randall Cobb, Robert Tonyan, and Aaron Jones should kind of go into this game with really flat target market share projections. If I were making my own projections from scratch, I would probably put them all in a bucket of like 20 to 22%, maybe 18 to 22%, but really, really kind of flat overall. You do have to factor in, the A dot for those targets. So I don't think that Randall Cobb is going to see like a 35% target share. He's not going to replace Davonte Adams' workload. His market share is insane. I do think that Randall Cobb is in the mix, but I kind of view those three as flatter at the top. And then I would also sort of say project St. Brown, AJ Dillon for about like, and even Mercedes Lewis in that 8 to 10% range. So I kind of see like two flat tiers for Rodgers. I don't think that any one player gets the Davonte Adams role, which is obvious to say, but I kind of view it as a little bit flatter than we might like. But Cobb definitely in the mix for, to lead this team in targets, but I don't really have a strong preference or a strong, lean in terms of who of those three will lead the team in targets for tonight. As for Connor or Edmonds, it's always such a tough question because Edmonds can get you the yardage. Connor's just going to scoop in for the touchdowns. We have at Number Fire, we project James Conner for points 5.7 scrimmage touchdowns at FanDuel Sportsbookies plus 120. So even at plus 120, kind of Number Fire sees him. He's actually minus 110. No, that's Nuke. Sorry. Plus 120. And then Connor again 0.57. So that's really nice. That's kind of the game script you're looking for a lineup where maybe Kyler Murray's not the MVP, which seems like a long shot because my Sims have him at 43%, still less than half. But compared to everyone else, that's just crazy high for tonight. But I would probably lean Chase Edmonds just due to the sheer fact that if James Conner does not score, he's not going to get you much. Chase Edmonds has touchdown regression coming his way. If he ever gets in on the goal line, he can still have a long touchdown. I would lean Edmonds there, especially at the lower salary between the two. Question: Emmanuel Sanders or Jalen Waddle? Good spot for Sanders. So Sanders is someone I haven't thought about a ton, just because his salary's up for this week from a main slate perspective, but from a season-long perspective, pretty good. Actually, I tried to build this. I don't know if this is going to work. I built this in about 10 minutes before we came on, just because I get so many start sit questions. I wanted to kind of see what I could do here because I do a lot of simulation work, and I don't like to kind of just talk randomly about stuff. So yeah, I mean this formatting's all it's pretty gross, but we can still see here that it's super close. Number Fire projects Jalen Waddle, and this is for PPR leagues. I don't know what your scoring system is, but Waddle for 12.1 FanDuel points, Manny Sanders for 11.2. But the odds that they kind of finish the same, it's about the same. I would lean then Emmanuel Sanders because his offensive expectation just significantly higher than Jalen Waddle's for this week. Question from Kyle: thoughts on Ertz and Edmonds tonight? So I kind of gave my thoughts on Chase Edmonds when I went over the Chase Edmonds versus James Conner situation. But as for Ertz, Really good role for him last week, which was kind of surprising just because he's a tight end and it takes a bit of time to transition usually for players. So it was really promising to see him get that 59% route rate last week. I could see like a high target per route rate, but a route rate of about 30% where they just schemed up some plays for him. So he went out there and he knew what to expect. 60% of the routes is pretty strong for a tight end, especially for someone who just joined the team. About half the snaps for him as well. The 5 targets, really strong as well, but some leverage on those targets too. One downfield, one red zone target for him with a 10-yard ADOT. Pretty good workload for a tight end. So if you're looking for ways to stack Kyler Murray, if you want to play Kyler at MVP, which again, about 43% likely that Kyler Murray ends up as the MVP on this slate. If you want to stack him and avoid DeAndre Hopkins, I think you could probably justify a double stack with Zach Ertz and Chase Edmonds, because if Chase Edmonds catches a touchdown, that's going to be a stack that definitely pays off because his salary's low of $9,500. But that's going to be a stack that's a little bit more unique than what we get with the most obvious plays. Same for Zach Ertz. He's not going to have a ton of yardage upside just because it's who he is, but he actually did tie for the team lead in yardage last week with 66. So I think Ertz is very much in play. Edmonds is very much in play. And for me, I know that Kyler Murray is going to be chalky at MVP, probably about 35, 40%. I've seen some lower projections than that, but should be some leverage still on Kyler at MVP. And then what you want to do from there is maybe not max out your salary with the Packers values, because that's what a lot of people will probably default toward doing, but maybe just stack him with someone other than DeAndre Hopkins. It's going to feel strange, but if you're building like 10 lineups, try it a few times, because that's really what we see in optimal lineups. Very rarely do optimal lineups spend all of the cap. So that's kind of the way that I'm playing it tonight. But Zach Ertz and Chase Edmonds very much in play for me. A question from Blue Crew, half PPR, Chase Edmonds or Eli Mitchell. I'm going to go Eli Mitchell there pretty easily, just because Chase Edmonds has a ton of he has both of them have touchdown issues. Mitchell because the offense, Edmonds because of the role. But Eli Mitchell, they featured him on Sunday night. He played 66% of the snaps, had 18 carries. I know no targets, but he had ran 14 pass routes, which was about 45% of the team's routes. It was ugly. It was rainy. But Eli Mitchell, great workload. So I would lean Eli Mitchell there over Chase Edmonds. Question from Scott, does Tonyan score again? And do you think Dylan's workload is expanded tonight? So I'll check out the touchdown odds here for Tonyan, just because I want to say yes, because he's Robert Tonyan and Davonte Adams is vacating a lot of red zone work. But Tonyan here, 0.33 touchdowns projected for him at number fire, right in line with what the odds at FanDuel Sportsbook say. I know it's 0.33. I know it's a third. My instinct says yes for Tonyan to score. He's one of my favorite ways to get exposure to this offense, but also AJ Dillon, great point to bring up, because I think AJ Dillon is going to be overlooked for tonight, just because we're replacing pass catchers with the big three out for the Packers, but that doesn't mean that it's all going to go to Tonyan and other receivers. AJ Dillon has been involved in this offense at times. You would think Aaron Jones replaces more of that wide receiver. He can split out wide and get some targets, but AJ Dillon then can play in the backfield. He rates out as a pretty good value at 6,500. I think this is a great spot where, everyone's going to default toward looking at, Randall Cobb, Robert Tonyan, St. Brown. Maybe we get some news as to who might start, who might run some extra routes. But AJ Dillon, we've seen him involved. We know that he can score. And I think that he's going to be one of my favorite ways. He and Tonyan, just because they have touchdown probability, that I really want exposure to AJ Dillon for tonight. So kind of sounds like I'm in on everyone, which I know. But it's hard because we get a ton of value from the Packers, and the Cardinals are the Cardinals, and it's really easy to like the Cardinals tied to Kyler Murray. But the way that I think I'll probably differentiate most is be a little bit low on Aaron Rodgers as MVP, just because he is going to downgrade in terms of efficiency without Davonte Adams out on the field. So if I'm playing quarterback at MVP, it's going to be Kyler, and I'll differentiate elsewhere. I'll leave a bunch of cap out there because I don't want to chase the value in max out lineups just because I think that's a little bit too duplicated. And with how random and high variance football is, that's not the way that I like to play things. And I'll also probably be low on DeAndre Hopkins just because the target share is getting better, but it's still not crazy high. And he's kind of due for some negative touchdown regression this season. If you bake in last year, he's just kind of making up for not scoring as much as he should have. So I'm going to be low on Hopkins and Rodgers because you have to take a stand somewhere. So that's kind of the two studs I'm looking to be a little bit lower on than normal. All right. DJ's asking Connor or Edmonds the better play tonight. I answered this one. I think it's Edmonds just because of the overall workload. Connor, if he doesn't score twice, probably doesn't have a whole lot of a ceiling. Also doesn't have much of a floor either. DJ's asking how I think Randall Cobb does tonight. So again, you would think he's the sort of most, he might be the most popular play just because his salary is $7,000. He rates out as the best median value for tonight. There's pretty high scoring odds relative to the salary. So I think he'll probably see 7-8 targets. Again, I projected him in about that 20% target share range. I don't think that he's going to get 30% of the team's targets. So, so I think he's fine, but I do not really think that it's going to sound weird because process wise, he's a great play. Strategy wise, I think that Cobb probably a little bit more popular than he deserves to be just because the sheer end upside, the yardage upside, probably not what we need it to be for him to match what the popularity likely will be at such a low salary. DJ's asking Prater or Crosby. I basically always go with the favorite. So I would go with Prater. Not a whole lot of difference here in terms of the projections, but I would always lean with the favorite when it comes to kickers. Tyler's asking Cobb, Kirk, or Landry as wide receiver 3 this week. That's a good one. Let me see what the numbers say here. Because we know that Randall Cobb's stepping up into a bigger role. Christian Kirk. Yeah, I'll clean this up for next week. I kind of built this real fast. So the numbers very clearly prefer Randall Cobb. It looks like he is about 44% likely to finish among these three as the highest projected scorer. Again, not a ton of upside, but still about 30% likely to get over 15. So I would just take the targets with Randall Cobb and feel pretty good there. Grim Fan is asking MVP Murray with no stack. It's crazy enough to work provided that everything is really dispersed. And provided that the running back score and probably get like receiving touchdowns there. And there's not a whole lot of rushing touchdowns. So I think you could do a Murray plus 4 Packers and you would have enough value probably just to put Rodgers in there. We did just see a lineup like that. I think it was Jalen Hurts against the Raiders. He was the MVP, but nobody was with him. So you could kind of, if you project a similar game script, that would be in play for tonight. All right. I think I'm scrolling through here. Evan's asking Michael Thomas and Josh Jacobs for Henderson. I have Eckler, Mitchell, Moss, Monty, and get Henderson. I would probably go ahead and do that. Henderson's role really good. He hasn't done a whole lot with it, but you can plug in Darrell Henderson every single week. We don't know what Michael Thomas is coming back into for the rest of the season. DJ's asking, do I like Kenneth Gainwell or Davonte Booker? Yes, I haven't looked at Booker much because he's not on the main slate. So let me do this real fast. Oh, yeah. So we're going to have Saquon halved. So that's kind of hard. It's hard to answer that without knowing in advance. So I would probably have to just wait until Sunday to get that one figured out. Jim's asking thoughts on Dylan tonight. I went over Dylan. I think he's a great pivot. I think he's just a great leverage play. There's obviously a path to a very low floor, low ceiling, but I think there's also a path to the Packers just using Aaron Jones more as a receiver and letting A.J. Dillon get some more of that running back work. I think he's a great way to get access to the Packers without chasing the wide receiver and tight end value. So I'm pretty big on A.J. Dillon for tonight. DJ's asking Colts defense this week. You could probably do a little bit better. It's a high scoring game, and 60% of fantasy points come from sacks and turnovers. So I can see it from that perspective, but you probably could do a little bit better on the waiver wire against a little bit of a worse offense there. And then final question from Kyle: favorite out of Green, Kirk, and Moore. Probably there. Christian Kirk. I don't know what the Sims say. I would assume it's Christian Kirk. AJ Green ran a bunch of routes last week, just the 3 targets. Christian Kirk should rate out better in terms of just high end upside, though, in terms of the air yards that he gets. And with Rondale Moore taking a step back a little bit with Zach Ertz there, I would go Christian Kirk out of those 3. That is going to do it for today's show. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for the questions. It's always great to have a lot of single game strategy, just because I think it's fun to go over and think differently about how a game might play out. So that's going to do it for today's show. Thank you to all of you, and big thank you to Joy Affleck for producing the video side of this show. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter at Gdula13. You can check out all my content on numberfire.com. Best of luck tonight, and let's hit that MVP.